Picture this. It's 1998, you're 9 years old, and the only Sonic games you've had for the past 4 years have been spin-off titles. Yeah, you think this was the Dark Age. Then you open the October issue of Sega Saturn magazine, those things we had before Eurogamer and Kotaku, and see this. That bold title, the news you've been waiting an entire console generation for. Sonic's back! I can't possibly overstate the amount of sheer hype I felt from that single article, and it was followed by a relentless campaign that just didn't let up. Adverts blasting Crush 40's Open Your Heart, shots of Sonic tearing through 3D stages at unbelievable speeds. This was what we'd been waiting for. It was pure wish fulfillment, and I let it carry me right along with it, eventually getting a Dreamcast and a copy of the game for myself shortly, and probably not coincidentally after my folks divorced. Thanks, parental guilt! All that's to say, I have a lot of nostalgia for this game, and that may become evident as we explore its various releases. Speaking of, I'll be looking at not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 versions of Sonic Adventure. The Dreamcast sold so poorly that it almost killed Sega off entirely. I seem to be the only kid at my school with the console and game. Some of my friends played Sonic Adventure a couple of years later when the unthinkable happened, and a Sonic game came out on a, dare I say it, Nintendo console! Sonic Adventure DX was quite a major revision, and there's a lot to talk about. Even then, only 4.7 million Gamecube consoles were sold in Europe, compared to the PS2's insane install base of 48 million. So again, hardly anyone played it. Most people I know played the 2010 supposedly HD version for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Steam. People tend to think it's identical to the Gamecube version, but in reality it was based on an earlier PC release, which itself was a port of the Gamecube version, which was already several steps removed from the Dreamcast original. Strap in, because I'm gonna have things to say about that 2010 travesty. Whichever version you play, you'll start the adventure as Sonic. Straight away, the game does everything it can to shout this is a new era and a new Sonic. Forget a hill zone, here's a city. Forget looking through the manual for the story, here's a cutscene. It throws you straight into a boss fight that's against someone other than Robotnik. This is Sonic, but not as you know it, and I absolutely loved it. For the first time in a Sonic game, I wasn't completing a linear stage progression. Instead, I was in a hub world I could freely explore. I had to go find the levels. There were regular story events with actual voice acting. Sonic's world felt cohesive in a way that it hadn't before. Sure, Sonic 3 had stage transitions for some connecting tissue, but being able to walk from Emerald Coast to Red Mountain anytime was alien to me. It was sometimes unclear where to go, but thankfully the hubs were littered with hint bubbles that more or less spelled it out for you. Now, with multiple playthroughs under my belt, some of that mystery magic has vanished. I know where to go and what to do, making the hubs a routine means to an end. I can't say they hold up on repeat visits, but at the same time they're not a detriment to the flow of the game. Once you're in a stage, that's where the magic truly starts. Sonic's movement is incredibly precise, his turning arc is really tiny, he's insanely responsive, almost snapping to positions when doing a 180, and moves at a pace that's satisfying and conveys speed, while still being easy to actually control. My only complaint is Sonic sometimes clipped a wall or part of the environment and lost all of his momentum. The homing dash makes its debut here. Attacking enemies with a regular jump at high speed in a 3D space would be very clumsy, so tapping the jump button again while in midair sends you hurtling at the nearest enemy, spring, or pickup. I'm impressed with the aim here. Very rarely did Sonic home in on something other than my intended target. It's incredibly intuitive. My favourite change is having the spin dash on a separate button. You can pull it out at a moment's notice, and using that for a quick boost of momentum before jumping out of it, especially on slopes, can open up some great shortcuts. The level design actively allows for this too, with a variety of routes and paths. Skillful gameplay is rewarded with new areas to explore, items to grab, and better completion times. That alone invites the replayability that made the Mega Drive games fun to return to. There are only a handful of shortcuts that feel artificial, and they mostly relate to Sonic's new move, the Lightspeed Dash. It allows you to travel along a line of rings and you unlock it between levels 2 and 3. It needs to be charged by spinning on the spot, limiting its utility, although there's an optional upgrade which reduces the charge time. By design, it breaks Sonic's forward momentum, and that's the last thing I want to do. I could probably count on one hand the amount of places I actually used this, and it rarely felt like it gave me a significant advantage. You also get an upgrade for it that targets enemies instead of rings, but my only use of it was mandatory for progression, destroying a monkey to open up Red Mountain. It just doesn't integrate itself into Sonic's constant energetic flow. There are also a couple of gimmicky levels that break up the pacing. First is a casino where an emerald's the main prize you need to collect rings to win. Instead of playing the tables, I tend to lose on purpose and platform through the sewers to collect what I need instead. I will say I enjoyed the Knights cameo here. There's a fun snowboarding section in Ice Cap which returns for Tails' Sand Hill, as well as a shooting minigame where you're in the tornado biplane. Sadly, this version of Sky Chase has 2 acts and you have to repeat them as Tails, so by the 4th run, it's definitely worn out its welcome. The Egg Viper, Sonic's final boss, also brings the experience down a notch. I can never be sure I'm going to clear it because it pulls this frustrating dying attack that can destroy the platform you're standing on. Taking a, frankly, cheap death here means restarting this several minutes long fight. Still, this is some of the best Sonic the Hedgehog gameplay you can experience to this day, and I can't stress enough how fun and liberating this part of the game is. It's like a playable virtual whirlwind roller coaster. While recording footage, I was consistently beating Sonic's campaign in around 2.5 hours, including all of the cutscenes. A couple of years ago, I had a race through Sonic's story against my friend Terry, and we naturally skipped the story beats. I finished the game in just over an hour, with Terry coming in fairly close behind me. That means over half my playtime is likely spent in between actual stages. I think the developers were concerned such a short game wouldn't sell, or that people would just rent it, and that led to the creation of other playable characters, hub worlds, character upgrades of varying usefulness, and a light touch pet simulator of the Chow Garden. Instead of having a single story, the tales split over 7 campaigns with differing gameplay styles. Sadly, these extra runs aren't created equally, with most of them clocking in between 40 minutes to an hour, with their stages typically lasting all of 2 minutes apiece. Tails spent most of the adventure running alongside Sonic, meaning the first half of his underwhelming playthrough is just an abridged version of Sonic's as you race the Hedgehog through a shorter version of the main hero's levels. Thankfully, Tails can fly. It makes him hilariously broken, and that novelty factor can make his levels fairly fun. Seriously, just look at this madness! His final stage, Speed Highway, is the only one that really felt like it was created with Tails' flight in mind though. There are lots of flight rings and alternate paths only the Fox can use, with the other levels up to that point mostly just being copy-pastes of Sonic's. I wonder how far they could have pushed his gameplay if they'd put more time into making unique layouts and areas just for him. He does have the only missable upgrade. It's found during a flashback to the past, and as you can't return to those sections, you only have one shot to grab it. To save you flying around for ages trying to remember where it is, like I did, here you go. Just fly left when you spawn into the area. This makes a fight with E102 even more of a joke. You're welcome! Tails also gets a half-decent story, learning to do more than just follow Sonic around and becoming a hero in his own right. I just couldn't help but think more could have been done with him, but that's a running theme across all of the extra characters. Knuckles thankfully better differentiates himself. His climbing and gliding returns in a treasure hunt mode where you need to find 3 shards of the Master Emerald. These stages do recycle Sonic's levels again, but with Knuckles' ability and a different gameplay focus emphasizing exploration, you'll see parts of them Sonic could flat out never reach. The Echidna's plot is also vastly improved over most other characters. He rarely overlaps with others' stories, so he fills in a bunch of narrative gaps. His ties to the Emeralds and general lore are directly related to the main threat, and the story would feel incomplete without him. Amy, meanwhile, can best be described as frustrating. I was surprised. I remembered her campaign being short but fun with a hammer jump that gets some real hype, but instead I found her clunky and irritating when I sat down to actually play it again. Amy's being pursued by a robot named Zero, and the game kind of goes through a Jill and Nemesis vibe, but never quite gets there. To be fair, that might be because the Japanese release of Sonic Adventure predates Resident Evil 3 by about a year. Amy's platforming is slower, there's some light puzzle elements, and even some traps. The problem is, Zero's also slow, his attacks are easy to avoid, and you can knock him down at any time. When you finally do stand up to him, he's an easy final boss, and the only time he poses any threat whatsoever is when the camera locks onto him and makes the game awkward to control. The camera in Amy's run is an absolute nightmare in general, constantly switching and interrupting your movement that's already hindered by not being able to reach top speed on an incline. Plot-wise, Amy turns up during Sonic's story in what feels like a weird filler arc, but beyond that, her story's only tied to E102's. I'm going to say this now and potentially upset a lot of people. I think you could cut every story except for Sonic and Knuckles, and very little would be lost from a narrative standpoint. The other 4 characters aren't required reading as far as I'm concerned. Then we have Big the Cat. My initial thoughts whenever I start Big's campaign is, I don't want to do this. His gameplay is diametrically opposed to Sonic's entire core concept. Instead of blistering speed and quick reactions, Big's gameplay revolves around fishing. Big's friend Froggy has run away, and car-lifting swole boy How Is That Not a Mean Big is trying to rescue him. Not only does it take ages to reel this stupid frog in stage after stage, but sometimes the game will randomly just say, "No, tough luck, do it again," for seemingly no reason. Oh, and someone help you if Froggy gets stuck on a wall or in a corner. Welcome to Jank City, population U. Froggy eats a Chaos Emerald and somehow has Chaos's missing tail, which the monster uses in all of one boss fight. That's it! That's the duo's entire contribution to the wider plot. This is the definition of tacked on and inconsequential. A complete waste of time and energy, and is usually the campaign that prevents me from unlocking the true ending, because I just don't want to play it again. I even changed how much footage I planned to record for this review and took advantage of old save files to minimize the amount of time I'd have to spend playing as Big, yet I still had to complete his story twice over for footage, which was honestly 2 times too many. Next up is E102, and I actually enjoy this character. You're one of Robotnik's robots, already an interesting premise on its own, in a 3D run and gun, tell me more, against a time limit, oh my, and destroying enemies puts more time on the clock, with combos being worth more time. This right here is how you make a new character and gameplay style that complements Sonic's brand while still feeling unique and standing tall as its own thing. The developers absolutely knocked it out of the park with this guy. Unfortunately, his campaign is almost entirely disconnected from everyone else's. Him and Amy are a side story that just so happens to be going on in parallel to other events. His boss battles are also extremely easy to cheese and lack substance. It's kind of like I bought an amazing Sonic game and it came with a demo disc that had a handful of pictures or proof of concepts for spin-off titles on it. Only one of them actively makes me mad, and I think you know which one that is. A couple I genuinely enjoy quite a lot, but if I'm revisiting Sonic Adventure, it's usually just a blast through the Blue Blur's stages and leave again. Of course, when you're doing a full playthrough, this multiple character approach leads to other problems, like seeing the same cutscene from 4 different perspectives, while not really learning anything new. Granted, the dialogue changes to reflect each character's interpretation of events, which is a nice touch, but come on! It also means repeatedly fighting the same boss multiple times, so here's your obligatory Chaos 4 footage that has to be included in every Sonic Adventure video by law. Oh, and let's not forget the number of characters who have to place the Wind and Ice keys in their slots to open Windy Valley and Ice Cap. It looks like it could be useful in the Mystic Ruins. I know, this is the 4th time I'm doing this. Despite those complaints, I have to admire the scope and ambition of this project. Sonic Team truly tried to deliver an epic hit, and in a lot of ways they succeeded. I kind of wanted a more focused game though. I look at what went into all those bells and whistles, including content I don't enjoy, hi Big, and I can't help but wish those resources had instead been concentrated and spent on the areas I get the most out of. I can feel the game stalling for time and padding itself out to try and prove its own worth. You can sense the designers felt the game had to validate itself as a full-price title, but most of their efforts come across as unnecessary. The game actively wastes my time in an attempt to seem more substantial than it really is. Supersonic's campaign, which is unlocked after completing everyone else's story, frustratingly including Biggs, no I'm not gonna let that go, is a prime example of this. It takes around 25 minutes to beat, but the only real gameplay comes in the form of a 2-minute boss fight. The rest is cutscenes and running around the hub worlds. Well, 2 minutes if you're any good at it, unlike me who ran out of super form on the final hit, somehow struck chaos anyway while depowered, thought I had won, and then screamed when the death counted and I had to restart the whole fight. Yeah, this fight can be kind of frustrating at times, not gonna lie. Another area of padding comes in the form of collecting emblems. There are 130 of them, and you get them by finding them in the hub worlds, completing minigames, completing normal stages of course, and doing trials which ask you to beat a level again, but while collecting 50 rings, or within a time limit, or catching more fish and then Froggy. In the Dreamcast release, this is purely for bragging rights, but the Gamecube's DX re-release fixes that issue, and now seems as good a time as any to jump into version comparisons. On Gamecube, you unlock a fully playable Game Gear game for every 20 emblems you grab. That significantly adds to the package's overall value, is maybe the first time a lot of fans got to play these titles, and it incentivizes engaging with the post-story content. Getting all 130 emblems unlocks Metal Sonic, who's literally just a reskin of Sonic. The footage you're seeing here is admittedly from the Steam release with mods, because I don't want to complete this game. I don't want to do Biggs B&A stages, I hate the fishing, I've more than covered why. I don't want to grind animals to force feed Chow to win 5 races for their emblems. I don't enjoy that Tamagotchi stuff. I also didn't have any fun in mission mode. This is new to the Gamecube version. You find cards in the hubs which give you a task, such as recompleting Speed Highway but grabbing a balloon at the end instead of exiting the stage normally, or bringing a statue of an old man to a specific spot for unknown reasons, or having Sonic X advertised to you ad nauseum. Yeah, this is the content we needed. Another thing DX gets called out for is being janky and glitchy. Look, I'm not gonna pretend it isn't. I put up with my fair share of shenanigans during my playthrough, but newsflash, the Dreamcast version isn't as stable or perfect as people like to make out either. The Stone Snake in Lost World has always had terrible collision. The camera can be aggravatingly awful, but that's the case across all releases. At least DX gives you the option to use the C-Stick. The Gamecube version's best known for its significant graphical changes that are carried over to all future releases. The majority seem to hate the new look, with many going as far as saying the Dreamcast version's the only one you should even consider playing because of them. I can't say I agree with that. There are some objective improvements and upgrades. On Dreamcast, Sky Chase recycles Sega Saturn character models from Sonic's 3D, R, and Jam. These have been swapped out on Gamecube. It adds a new graphical effect underwater to simulate light being refracted. This is completely absent from later releases and unique to this version. On the other hand, there are some clear downgrades and mistakes. This floor texture and light shaft showed as an exit above on Dreamcast, but on the Gamecube the relevant texture has seemingly been dropped in without applying a blending style, leaving it a black and white mess. The ice cap zone was a chilly blue on Dreamcast but seems to be in grayscale on Gamecube. It feels like an oversight or mistake rather than a conscious design choice. The majority of changes, such as the new textures for Twinkle Park and several other stages and hubs, are entirely subjective and down to personal preference. While I prefer the Dreamcast textures in most cases, I really like the new look for Mystic Ruins. With less density and detail and higher contrast between wall and floor colours, it's easier to navigate. One change I do hate is the Egg Viper's chamber. On Dreamcast it looks clean, polished and new, but the Gamecube changes it to a rusted, aged and cobbled together tube of scrap. Narratively, this is a new base. It's absent from the skyline at the start of the game, only appearing later into the story. Knuckles' campaign calls it out with the hint bubble saying a building has appeared, while Amy has a cutscene outright drawing attention to the fact it wasn't there before. The Gamecube textures cause a contradiction between what we're explicitly told and what we actually see. The playable characters had their models updated, and for some reason the internet seems to hate these, calling them plastic looking. Personally, I much prefer the new models. In terms of overall form, topology, and resemblance to the character artwork, these are much better than the Dreamcast versions. Heck, characters even have actual fingers now. DX came out after Sonic Adventure 2, but before Battle, so weirdly Sonic's model actually looks better here than it does in the sequel. I think it largely comes down to the lighting, the materials and shaders applied letting the overall aesthetic down. If we jump ahead to a modded Steam release again, you can see how good Sonic's model looks with the proper settings applied. The Gamecube gets a lot of flack for having poor lighting, and there are definitely areas where I have to wonder what they were thinking, but it's nowhere near as bad as people make out. In my experience, it's the 2010 release that drops the ball, and people assume the Gamecube version must be exactly the same, when that simply isn't true. On the Dreamcast, this scene between Tails and Big clearly takes place at night. In comes the Gamecube version and the lighting's different, Big's cat eyes don't glow in the dark anymore, but it's still clearly nighttime. When we jump over to the 2010 HD version, however, it's like they're standing under stadium spotlights. The ocean's even a luminous blue against this supposedly night sky. On the plus side, the entrance to Ice Caps had its colour restored on PS3, I guess. You know what, let's talk about that release. First, there's how they sold it, which I'm admittedly salty about. On consoles, it's sold in two parts. Sonic Adventure is a base game, and a DX upgrade DLC. Now, Dreamcast purists might be thinking, great, I can just buy the base game, not get the DLC, and have the best possible experience. Nope, not how it works. You still get Sonic Adventure DX if you just buy the base version. So what does the DLC actually do then? Well, it adds mission mode back in, you know, for people who really need their Sonic X billboards, and it allows you to unlock Metal Sonic. That's right, they carved stuff out of Sonic Adventure DX, including the completion reward, to resell to you separately. Considering only 0.8% of players actually have the trophy for getting all 130 emblems, this DLC is borderline useless to the majority of people who bought it, and worse still, they probably don't even realize it. It gets even better. The PS3 version's in 720p. Instead of offering true widescreen, we have an ugly border around everything. The FMVs are really badly compressed and noticeably blotchy. The internal render resolution doesn't seem much higher, and I honestly couldn't see a significant upgrade over my GameCube's visual output. That cool underwater effect is gone. Oh, and the Game Gear games have been removed. On the plus side, these are all things the Steam release can improve upon and fix, right? I mean, that's got to be the most definitive version. It's on PC, that's always the best platform. Wait, no. It says here pretty much the exact same thing, but 1080p. Great. Great. Thankfully, the Sonic community were able to do Sega's job for them, and there's an entire library of mods out there. Personally, I use the SADX mod installer. It walks you through the most popular mods one at a time, asking if you'd like to install them, and these do things like restoring the Dreamcast lighting system and environment textures. Through these mods, I'm able to have a true HD, proper widescreen experience, where visually I can have my unusual preference of the Gamecube models in the Dreamcast world. It's a shame this isn't the official product, because this is what Sega themselves could and should have given us. It is an absolute revelation, and when I next replay this game, it'll be this version of it. I highly recommend it as one of the best Sonic experiences out there. Regardless of which version you play, you're still getting the same soundtrack and voice cast. I'm not an audiophile, I rarely take notice of sound design and music in games, but I took notice of Sonic Adventure. At the risk of sounding tropey and cliché, this is a soundtrack I happily listen to outside of the game. The tracks are fast, kinetic, punchy, and perfectly complement the on-screen action. Each character has a vocal theme song that matches their personalities and aspirations, and most of them are great, if a little cheesy. Amy's is a bit concerning though, and could probably bump up the age rating on its own.
Painting myself blue for you. Cute. I had to shave it.
Yeah, someone might want to check in on her. Meanwhile, E102 kind of gets shafted as the only character whose song doesn't have any vocals. It doesn't matter and Open Your Heart can get me pumped almost anywhere, anytime, regardless of the context. They bring back a wave of nostalgia and can even be a source of energy and inspiration. Even instrumental tracks like Emerald Coast and Speed Highway are great to draw, write, and work to. Also, shout out to the returning tracks from Sonic 3D, it is good to have you back. I know it's popular to dunk on the cutscenes in this game, but the voice acting is surprisingly good for 1998 standards. Yeah, this came out December 1998 in Japan and late 1999 in Europe. Its Japanese release was the same year as Resident Evil 2, Spyro the Dragon, and Metal Gear Solid, the game that set the high bar for voice acting in the first place. Yeah, there are a couple of bad reads, mostly from Tails' child actor.
I wonder what happened to Sonic.
But compared to its contemporaries, this was considered good voice acting, and I think it still holds up well enough today. The audio mixing is admittedly an issue, and that gets progressively worse with each re-release. Without the subtitles, I'd struggle to make out what some characters are saying over the background music and sound effects by the time we get to that god-awful 2010 release. Some scenes are worse than others, and at times the quality can change dramatically from sentence to sentence. In that regard, your mileage is going to vary platform to platform, but once again, the 2010 version is the worst culprit. Now I'd like to invite you to a section of the video called Things I Care About that I doubt anyone else does. But Sam, isn't that the entire video? Yeah, I know what you're typing in the comments. For all the talk of the character's new designs, coloured eyes, and longer limbs, I actually think this was a decision made much later into development than most would have you believe. If we look at Sonic's Saturn-era artwork, we can already see him getting taller. When you get an extra life, the icon is of classic Sonic's head, and Tails' B and A missions include an image of a different Sonic model to the one used in-game. Even the Dreamcast's final release models more closely resemble the Saturn era's artwork than the Dreamcast era. This is probably why they would change so drastically for the DX re-release. The Emeralds are in an open-air shrine rather than the hidden palace zone like they were in Sonic and Knuckles. You might think maybe the Emeralds were moved there, maybe they were exposed after Sky Sanctuary collapsed, or even, hey, the Master Emerald's in Angel Island Zone during the end credits, who says Knuckles carried it all the way back to Hidden Palace? And that would be fine, except for these flashbacks to the past, where the Emeralds are very clearly in the same open-air shrine, implying this is where they've always been housed. Also, just how many times is Angel Island gonna fall out of the sky? It happens twice in just this game. Knuckles, stop causing tsunamis, you're killing people, man! Speaking of, Knuckles outright states he doesn't know why he alone guards the Master Emerald. We finally get answers to that when we see the Echidna race in their prime, explore their civilization firsthand, and witness their downfall, but Knuckles, of all people, flat out doesn't react. Dude's mind should be blown. At the very least, ask some questions or comment on their actions. You cannot be this chill about it, dude. Speaking of races, we finally see humans other than Robotnik in the games, and no attention's called to it at all. Normally, that would be fine, we could just assume they were in the background or otherwise off-screen during the 16-bit games, but the Fleetway Sonic the Comic established Mobius and Earth as separate worlds. Archie's Mobius is some kind of future version of Earth, it gets really messy. And Sonic X, which adapted the stories of both adventure games, sets its entire premise around Sonic getting sent from Mobius to Earth via Chaos Control, with the entire first season seeing the gang trying to get home again. Granted, that's media outside of the games, fair enough, but even the games themselves are inconsistent on this. Humans stick around in varying art styles through to Sonic Unleashed, but by Sonic Forces, all of the planet's inhabitants are seemingly anthropomorphs like Sonic and pals. Sega, pick a story! Speaking of continuity, I do like how they approached Robotnik's name. He was Eggman in Japan, but Robotnik in Europe and America. That was fine before the internet, globalization, and having actual stories in platformers, but in the late 90s, it became a problem for Sega. In the first boss battle, he introduces himself as Robotnik and Sonic calls him Eggman, seemingly as an insult. My headcanon is that Robotnik decided to just own it and rebrand it. Another possibility is Sonic saw Eggman on some of Robotnik's machines in the previous games and twisted it into an embarrassing nickname. Sort of like how I shuddered at my YouTube channel, Xbox Live, and PSN handles will forever be Afro Blue. Either way, it's nice that both names are acknowledged with only one taken forward. Chaos transforms every time he absorbs a Chaos Emerald, but because there are 2 instances where Robotnik feeds him 2 emeralds at the same time, we never get to see Chaos 3 or 5. I can't help but wonder what those forms might have looked like. Likewise, Chaos 6 is reunited with his missing tail, and that causes a physical transformation. So would the other forms have looked different if he'd had that tail all along? I think it's important to highlight I think about these things because it means the game stayed with me long after I turned it off. It made an impression on me, it means something to me. Yes, a bloated scope and overambition did compromise it, but I'm so happy they tried with such earnesty and passion. You rarely see creative teams just go for it like this, and that's what makes Sonic Adventure a must-play title to be absolutely treasured. Thank you for sticking around this long. This has been by far one of my longest ever videos, but I'm also fairly confident it's one of my best. Even if it has been utterly exhausting, but a lot of fun to make. If you like Sonic, great, me too. I have a lot of videos about the Blue Boy here. Maybe consider checking a few of them out. I also have a Discord, Twitter, and Patreon if any of those take your fancy. And as always, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and consider sharing the video with a friend or 3. I'll be back next time with Sonic Adventure 2, and then after that, we'll probably steer away from Sonic for just a little bit of a break from that topic, look at a few underrated PS1 games, and have some fun.